Morning, everyone, and welcome to the Subcommittee on Communications and Technology and the hearing on the future of audio. I was telling our council I'm really tempted to start out by saying the old radio thing I did in college. Arctic First Federal Savings Loan time in 30 seconds will be 10:25. Temperature in downtown Fairbanks, 30 below zero. CBS News is next on the Mighty 90 KFRB Fairbanks. I have actually, I think it was back to 1974, I still remember. You know, there's a saying allegedly from the Chinese that says, may you live in interesting times. It's supposedly a curse, but the alternative is living in boring times. And I think you all at this panel are going to convince us we're not living in boring times. Today's audio market is certainly not boring. As I mentioned, I was a radio broadcaster for more than 2 decades, and my, how the industry has changed. The number of full-power broadcast radio stations has jumped by 23.7% since 1996 to more than 15,000. More than 2,000 local broadcast radio stations have gone HD, each offering as many as 4 channels and the benefits of digital technology. Many broadcasters now also simulcast their stations over the Internet, as well as offer dedicated Internet content. Satellite radio offers more than 150 digital channels to more than 20 million subscribers. Internet radio garners more than 89 million listeners each month. The number of subscribers worldwide to mobile music streaming services is expected to reach 160 million by 2016. Anyone with a web page can transmit his or her songs to the world. The majority of Americans over the age of 12 possess a portable music player that lets them take their music wherever they go. And the growth of the cloud now enables consumers to have their music everywhere they go without even taking it. On the other hand, this means today's songwriters and performers have a wealth of options for reaching music lovers. On the other, it means securing a critical mass of listeners may be harder as audiences fracture. Are artists liberated by the digital age or finding it harder to cut through the cacophony? Is it ironically easier to start a career but harder to make a living in the music business today? Is the pie getting larger, or is everyone nibbling at each other's slice? One thing is certain, experimentation will be critical as new technologies challenge existing business models. That's why I was intrigued by the announcement yesterday that Clear Channel and record label Big Machine will share over-the-air revenue while trying to grow the online market. This deal shows that radio broadcast stations and record labels can get to yes on issues that have vexed the industry for years. I, for one, encourage the private sector to negotiate deals without government involvement. It's much better for stakeholders to solve their own business matters than for Congress in Washington to try and solve them for them. I'll be interested to hear if other broadcasters and record labels are willing to enter into similar deals with Clear Channel and Big Machine and with each other. We have an amazing panel today that spans almost the entire distribution chain, from songwriter to performer, to service provider, to device manufacturers. I'll be curious to hear from our witnesses how changes in communication services and consumer electronics equipment is affecting the way audio content is distributed and consumed. So we certainly live in interesting times, and I think that's a good thing. I would now yield to the former chairman of the full committee, Mr. Stearns.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think you've echoed pretty much what I was going to say. Consumers are listening to music that can be chosen from terrestrial radio, HD radio, Sirius XM, satellite radio, cable, Pandora, live radio, YouTube, iTunes, Vivo, Move Music, Rhapsody, and the list goes on. So I think we have competition. As one of our witnesses, Gary Shapiro, states in his testimony, we have rapidly shifted to a growing set of choices with a phenomenal array of devices, products, sources, and services. And I had the opportunity to see this recently at the Consumer Electronics Show. And our witnesses today represent an important competition in the music space, offering consumers an array of choices and musicians new opportunities to gain new audiences. Gone are the days when consumers are limited to radio and just television, and gone too should be the archaic policies of the old era of prohibiting free market decisions. In today's struggling economy, we're looking at a market that is working, and let's keep it that way. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And I would now yield to the vice chair of the subcommittee.
Well, I appreciate that as well. Appreciate your college experience. I also DJ, just not on radio, but parties of all weddings. And I'll tell you what, in my time when I had to go to Homer's Music to buy vinyl, it's really hard to find the Flying Dutchman and Homer's Records. back in the 70s and early 80s, but on today's digital world, it's a lot easier. How things have changed since then, and in fact, my 3 sons, 2 of them teenagers, only the oldest even cares what a CD is. The other 2 don't care. It's all about the digital world. It's about organizing their music as they want it and see it, having the devices necessary to play it. And where it goes, I don't know. But I like it, like the Rolling Stones say. Now, I will say that I am intrigued as well with the contract or agreement between Big Machine and Clear Channel. But I need to work through this a little bit more before I have a level of enthusiasm, because I also remember private contracts between radio stations and record labels. That was called payola. And so I don't know where we're going with this, but it is intriguing, and I'll yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Now recognize the ranking member of the subcommittee from California, Ms. Eshu.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, and welcome to all of the witnesses. More than 90 years ago, Pittsburgh's KDKA launched the nation's first commercial radio broadcast. For decades, AM and FM radio served as the primary source for local news, information, and music for millions of Americans. While I continue to believe that broadcast radio plays an important role in local communities around our country, the Internet has opened up a world of innovation that's driving new business models like on-demand streaming, providing new opportunities for independent musicians, and even expanding the reach of traditional AM and FM stations to audiences not only around the country but around the world. Many of these innovations are being developed in my congressional district in Silicon Valley. Last year, I had an opportunity to visit a Palo Alto startup known as TuneIn. It's headquartered in an old plumbing supply store, which I remember going to when my children were small. They had 40 employees when I was there last year. TuneIn has developed a mobile app featuring over 60,000 AM, FM, HD, and Internet radio stations, and an active monthly listener base of more than 30 million people. I mean, that's stunning, just in and of itself. And TuneIn is just one example. Over the past decade, we've seen the emergence of Spotify, Pandora, iHeartRadio, Apple iTunes, Amazon Music Store, Google Music, and Slacker Radio. The significance of these services is, in fact, quite stunning. Last year, within the United States, 52% of record company revenues came from digital sources. So we need to embrace these innovative technologies and not hinder their growth. The future of audio is about enhancing, in my view, consumer choice, whether at home or on the go using smartphones, tablets, or other portable devices. I've always opposed technology-specific mandates, always, because technology moves at the speed of lightning. Before our ink is even dry, the technology has changed. And for that reason, I've always opposed technology-specific mandates, which is why last year I joined with Representative Issa to introduce the Creativity and Innovation Resolution. The resolution asserts that Congress should not mandate specific technology that limits the way consumers listen to local news, information, and music. The resolution has the rare distinction of being endorsed by CEA, CTIA, and RIAA, and I hope my colleagues will join me in supporting this bipartisan resolution. As consumers increasingly stream audio through their mobile devices, I'm also interested in learning whether data caps impact user behavior. While more often discussed in the context of data-intensive video, users who stream just 1 hour per day of high-fidelity audio through a typical online music subscription service can easily exceed the monthly data package offered by many wireless carriers. This is an issue that rests squarely with our subcommittee's jurisdiction, and I think it's important for us to examine this closely. Mr. Chairman, the future of audio looks bright as consumers have a growing array of options, including online music stores, subscription-based services, satellite radio, and HD radio. So thank you for holding this morning's hearing. We have a great panel, and I'm anxious to hear what they have to instruct us, and I welcome the witnesses again, and thank you for holding the hearing. I don't. Does any of our members want me to yield time? Okay. Yield back, Mr. Chair.
Generally yields back the balance of time. Chair recognizes the chairman of the full committee, the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Upton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. From the radio dramas and fireside chats of the 30s to talk radio and the online streaming of today, audio content has been an integral part of American society for the last century. 20 years ago, the world of audio choices was pretty simple: AM, FM, cassette, CD. The world of audio in 2012 offers so much more. Broadcasters are using digital services to deliver HD radio. Satellites 22,000 miles above the earth provide subscription radio service to millions of Americans. Technological advances make it possible to carry an entire music library in your pocket, and an increasing number of Americans are streaming music over the internet to their computers and wireless devices. Not only has the ability to access a world of professional audio content gotten so much easier and more universal, the ability for people around the world to produce and distribute their own works over the internet has changed major industries: music, journalism, entertainment, just to name a few. So today we're going to hear from the broadcasters that are innovating, mobile wireless providers that are making access to media ubiquitous, internet pioneers that are leveraging the internet to bring users personalized content channels, and professional artists at the center of it all on how this new media frontier is changing their industries and the way that we listen. I'll be particularly curious to hear, as with Chairman Walden, to hear their reaction to yesterday's announcements by Clear Channel and the Big Machine. It looks to me like an agreement that might break the logjam that has plagued this space and help advance online radio. Best of all, it doesn't require legislation or regulation. So I thank the witnesses, and I don't know if any members on my side.
Ms. Blackburn.
Ms. Blackburn, balance of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to say welcome to all of our witnesses. I enjoy working with each of you on this issue. I think it is vitally important. Audio distribution systems can't be successful without compelling content, and in Nashville, we think that's a really important thing. Likewise, music won't enjoy wide distribution without innovative technologies, and Mr. Shapiro and I continue to have this ongoing discussion. The audio marketplace is constantly evolving, but the music and the technology industries need each other in order to thrive. I believe we can be both pro-intellectual property and pro-innovation. I'm determined that we're going to find a way to do that. And we must be both if we want to grow and be successful. And for our nation's economy, Tennessee's economy, and for our exports, we need to figure this one out. Big Machine Records, which is a Nashville, Tennessee company and a major broadcaster, as Chairman Upton said, did enter into a voluntary agreement with yesterday on the performance rights issue. We are pleased to see that. We're looking forward to more good things so that the industry does continue to grow in Nashville. We like to say it all starts with the song. We believe it does, and we want to make certain that we figure this one out. Thank you so much. I yield back.
Generally yields back to the chairman. Chairman, do you have anyone else you wanted to yield to? Anyone else on our side? Apparently not. Chairman yields back the balance of his time. Now recognize the former chairman of the committee, the gentleman from California, Mr. Waxman.
Thank you, Chairman Walden, for holding this hearing to examine the future of audio. We live in an era of rapidly changing technologies and consumer behavior. Innovation over the past decade has led to a proliferation of choices in the way consumers access audio content, whether it's new subscription-based streaming services, webcasting, or HD radio offered by traditional over-the-air broadcasters. The dynamic audio marketplace has brought consumers more choices, greater accessibility, and lower prices. As technology advances, it's important that we do not lose sight of the artists, musicians and songwriters whose work compels consumers to seek out these innovative new services. Thanks to these new technologies, barriers to entering the music market have never been lower, but paradoxically, the number of people who identify themselves as musicians has declined over the last decade. We need to understand why this is happening. Congress has an important role to play in ensuring that singers, songwriters, and other musicians are compensated fairly, both through combating online piracy and ensuring an equitable licensing and royalty system. I'm proud to have co-sponsored the Performance Rights Act during the last Congress. This bill would ensure that musicians are compensated by over-the-air broadcasters for the right to publicly perform their music. As we will hear from some of our witnesses today, the exemption for broadcasters is not only grossly unfair to performing artists, it also creates an unlevel playing field that disadvantages innovative audio services such as Pandora. Whatever the rationale may have been in the past, there is no reason in today's environment that over-the-air broadcasters should be allowed to play music without compensating the artists that perform it. Although we're still learning the full details of the agreement between Clear Channel and Big Machine, I'm encouraged that a major broadcasting group has acknowledged that performing artists should be compensated for their use for their music on over-the-air radio. I look forward to hearing from our panel and about the impact of wireless data caps and proposals to require or encourage FM chips. We also need to ask whether policymakers should encourage FM chips to be incorporated into mobile handsets. I'd like to now yield the balance of my time to Mr. Doyle.
Thank you, Mr. Waxman, and thank you to our witnesses here today. Mr. Chairman, I'm continually amazed by the massive changes in recent years in how music is created, shared, and promoted. Changes in the industry have shifted music consumption away from the mega artist to support more production and distribution of independent music. And this has allowed new musical genres and subgenres to thrive. I'm not exactly sure what nerdcore is, for instance. I think it's a mix between Star Wars and Vanilla Ice. But as this subcommittee well knows, I've been a supporter of the mixtape and the mashup for a long time. And I'm fascinated to see how innovative musical production has not only exploded, but found near-endless ways to reach an audience. Websites like Kickstarter, for example, have allowed musicians from my hometown of Pittsburgh to make a living selling records and merchandise entirely from online donations. I think these are very positive trends. Increasing the diversity of audio programming and providing ways for more people to be heard are some of the main reasons that I've been such a strong supporter of low-power FM radio. LPFM is another platform that can bring greater diversity to our media landscape, and it is a platform for independent artists to gain a listenership. Internet radio has also been a key driver of this kind of innovation. The Internet has opened the door for more terrestrial broadcasters to stream their content live on the air. So now people around the world can listen to a station they love. I hope that can expand even more in the future. And countless online webcasters, one of which has joined our panel, let us listen to any artist we want, whenever we want. So I'm really interested to hear.
We have a terrific array of witnesses and a lot of supporting people behind you as well. So, Mr. Allison, we're going to start with you. Mr. Ben Allison is a bassist, a composer, and governor of the New York chapter of the National Academy of Recording Artists and Sciences. Thank you for being here. Pull that microphone. Generally, these have to be worked pretty close, and make sure the light's on, and it's all yours.
Good morning, Chairman Walden, Ranking Member Eshu, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Ben Allison. I am a jazz musician, a composer, and a producer based in New York. I am also a board member of the New York chapter of the Recording Academy. Outside the Beltway, the Recording Academy is best known for producing the Grammy Awards. But here in D.C., the Academy is the trade association representing more than 20,000 performers, songwriters, and studio professionals. I want to thank the members for the privilege of being able to share my perspective as an artist and to represent the Academy. In less than 24 hours, I'll be traveling to the Bonnaroo Music Festival in Tennessee to perform. But the music created at Bonnaroo will not be confined to the 80,000 people attending the concerts. Bonnaroo will offer live streaming of performances, while internet radio services like Pandora will offer Bonnaroo-themed stations. This is just one example of why I'm excited about the future of audio. The infinite possibilities of stations on internet radio and the niche genres available on satellite have given more artists a chance to be heard. As a working musician on the New York music scene, I meet many young and emerging artists who are using these new services to connect to fans. And these new platforms don't only provide promotion, they provide compensation to artists and songwriters. And the sound quality offered through these services, while subpar in its early days, is improving. I've chosen my instrument, which is an 1840 American-made bass, for its pure and nuanced sound. So I want my listeners to hear a recording that sounds as close to the original performance as possible. The Recording Academy's Producers and Engineers Wing has been very active on the issue of sound quality, and consumers, music services, and manufacturers are responding. But to creators, compensation from these new services is the most important aspect of this issue. Internet and satellite radio services primarily pay performers through a compulsory license processed by Sound Exchange, a nonprofit entity that pays 50% of the royalties collected directly to performers. But with interactive or on-demand services, unlike internet radio, the consumer can choose to listen to a particular track whenever they want. Streaming services such as Spotify are currently paying a very low royalty rate, a fraction of a penny per spin. We're told that we are benefiting from the promotion, but promotion should never replace compensation. If on-demand services replace downloads and the royalties don't increase, this will be a great concern for creators. But ironically, one of the most pressing issues for performers is not about the future of audio, but its past. Terrestrial radio broadcasters have an inexplicable free ride when it comes to performance royalties. They are exempt from paying performers any royalties when they use our recordings to fuel their multi-billion-dollar industry. This makes corporate radio the only business in America that can legally use another's intellectual property without permission or compensation. All of the other broadcast platforms pay a performance royalty for sound recordings. Every other country in the developed world has such a right. But in the U.S., over-the-air broadcasters are required to pay songwriters, as they should, but not performers. Previous private negotiations led to an industry agreement that would have created a terrestrial performance royalty in exchange for specific rate reductions on simulcasting. Unfortunately, when the NAB board voted on the deal, they changed the agreed-upon numbers, making it a net loss for the music side, and the deal collapsed. To add insult to injury, terrestrial broadcasters are now asking for another legislative perk, a mandate to include FM receivers in smartphones. They already exploit one anomaly in the law. They do not pay performers, while new audio technologies do. Now, they want a second legislative anomaly, to have a free ride, quite literally, on the backs of new devices. Artists believe that Congress should address the first anomaly before there can be any discussion of the second. Finally, I'd like to close by discussing the lower barriers to entry for music creators. I'm a professional musician. I started taking music lessons at the age of 9 and played my first gig when I was 16. This is my life and my livelihood. That said, I'm delighted that those for whom music is a part-time pursuit can have access to the digital marketplace. And while it's fine for the market to welcome non-professional musicians, we must not allow the market to make music a non-profession. Each one of my fellow panelists here have a role in connecting the music creator to the fan, but they'll have no business if there's no great music. Without the songwriter putting that first note on paper, without the musicians performing that song in ways that move us, without the producer and engineer capturing that performance, there will be no iPods, no Pandoras, no labels, no publishers. Music must be respected, content protected online, and all creators compensated. So let me close by stating one constant in the music industry. In this regard, the future of audio is the same as the past. It is dependent upon the creator. And we, distinguished members of the subcommittee, are dependent on you to protect our rights. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Allison. We appreciate your testimony and your music, and we welcome you here. Our next witness is Mr. David M. Israelite, President and CEO of the National Music Publishers Association. Mr. Israelite, delighted to have you here today. Thanks for your testimony, and please go ahead.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Walden, Ranking Member Ashew, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to talk about the future of audio as it pertains to music publishers and songwriters. I serve as president and CEO of the National Music Publishers Association, the principal trade association representing music publishers and songwriters in the United States. Now in our 95th year, we represent over 2,800 member companies with the goal of protecting and advancing their property rights on the legislative, litigation, and regulatory fronts. Prior to this position, I also had the honor of serving at the Department of Justice, where I chaired the department's task force on intellectual property. Issues involving the music industry are complicated, in part because there are two separate and distinct copyrights in music. The first copyright, which we represent, is for the underlying musical composition created by songwriters and often owned or represented by a music publisher. I am here representing that half of the music industry. The second copyright is for any recording of that song, commonly known as the sound recording copyright, and represented by Mr. Sherman and the record labels. It is crucial to understand that these two different copyrights are controlled and represented by different interests and are often treated very differently under the law and in business practices. If that were not complicated enough, the different uses of our musical composition copyright are also treated very differently under the law and through government regulation. Songwriters and music publishers attempt to earn a living through three primary means of utilizing their separate copyright: mechanical reproductions, public performances, and audiovisual synchronizations. Depending on the particular songwriter or publisher, each type of income represents roughly a third of our income. First, there is the mechanical reproduction right. An example is when a consumer downloads a song from iTunes or streams music through a service like Spotify. For songwriters, this right is regulated by Section 115 of the Copyright Act, which imposes a compulsory license system on the songwriter community. Songwriters and music publishers do not get to negotiate the value of our intellectual property in a free market. For record labels, this is a free market right and not regulated by law. Second, there is the public performance right. An example is when music is performed on the radio, whether it be broadcast or digital. While this right is inherently unregulated by law for us, the vast majority of the market is regulated by consent decrees with the Department of Justice. Again, under these consent decrees, songwriters and music publishers do not negotiate the value of their intellectual property in a free market. In addition, there are situations where the rights of songwriters and music publishers are utilized using these consent decrees, but there is no compensation for vast lengths of time due to the terms of the consent decrees. Finally, there is the use of music and synchronized with video. Traditionally, this has included using music in movies, television, and commercials. For songwriters and music publishers, this is a free market right, not regulated by law. Newer forms of this right include music videos and the use of music in user-generated content such as in YouTube. Music publishers and songwriters face three primary challenges when we look to the future. First, we must do a better job of protecting music from theft. While there can be legitimate debate about how to best deal with new technologies, it can never be right to steal the intellectual property of songwriters. It also cannot be right for parties to facilitate or turn a blind eye to such theft while profiting from that theft. Second, we must find efficient ways to license our copyrights and empower new business models. Much of the current licensing system is outdated and inefficient. And finally, we must ensure that future business models fairly compensate songwriters. Licensing new business models efficiently does no good if new business models do not allow a songwriter to earn a living. The impact of theft on the music world is a familiar subject to all of you. It is important to consider that it is significantly more difficult for songwriters to police the internet for infringement. Just a few months ago, 25 parties completed a year-long negotiation over rates for 5 new categories of music services to allow flexibility in creating new services that enable consumers to access and use and purchase music in previously impossible ways. These new categories allow consumers to enjoy and access their own music across almost every electronic device. And parties representing digital services, record labels, and songwriters are currently involved in discussions on how to work together to improve our licensing system. I believe the streaming market is one of the significant growth areas for music in the future. As this area of the market grows, we need to ensure that songwriters are fairly compensated for their work. It is also crucial that new services like Vivo properly license and compensate songwriters. In conclusion, songwriters and music publishers will continue to embrace new delivery models and technology, but as the future of audio develops, Congress and the music community must ensure that laws protect intellectual property while providing fans the music they want and in the manner that they want. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the time.
Mr. Israelite, thank you for your testimony. We appreciate it. Now we're going to turn to Mr. Kerry Sherman, who's Chairman and CEO of the Recording Industry Association of America. Welcome, Mr. Sherman, and please go ahead.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Walden, Ranking Member Eshoo, and members of the subcommittee. The music industry has a great story to tell. Record companies have transformed how they do business, and the evolution will continue, enabling new artists to prosper and allowing consumers to enjoy music in many different ways. The music industry is now primarily digital, and if you'll look at the slides on the screens, you'll see that CDs are no longer the primary format or the primary source of revenue. Digital is not just our future, it is our present. In 2004, the first year we had real digital revenues, the industry earned only $190 million from digital services. Last year we earned nearly $3.5 billion. That's quite a change. We used to hear that we needed to get a new business model. Well, our companies have done just that. You want DRM-free downloads? We've got that. You want to pay a small monthly fee for a subscription to unlimited music on your computer or smartphone? We've got that too. You want free ad-supported streaming? Got it. You want a music service bundled with your mobile phone? Got that. You want to store all your music in the cloud so that you can access it from anywhere? That's now here. You want specialized digital radio services? Lots are available. You want AM/FM radio stations online? That's available too. In fact, there are over 500 digital services authorized by our member companies worldwide, offering 20 million authorized tracks. And we're not stopping there. One of our highest priorities is to develop the infrastructure that will make it faster and easier to offer even more innovative models to fans. Just last month, as David said, we announced with NMPA and a large number of digital music services a groundbreaking licensing agreement that will make it easier for digital services to clear rights for new models. And we're also working on new industry-wide databases and royalty distribution systems to make royalty payment functions more efficient. It probably goes without saying that we're embracing these new offerings under the continuing threat of rampant piracy. In fact, we're less than half the size we used to be, down to $7 billion in 2011 from nearly $15 billion in 1999. Even more worrying is that according to BLS data, the number of people who identify themselves as musicians has declined over the last decade by 41% since the industry's high point in 1999. Clearly, piracy affects not just our economy, but our culture. When it comes to protecting creative rights, strategic copyright enforcement, combined with robust new legal services, can make a difference. For example, LimeWire, which was the world's most popular illegal peer-to-peer file sharing service, was finally shut down by a federal court in October 2010. The very next month, digital sales of music improved, and they've remained higher ever since. Just a couple of months ago, a market research firm released a survey showing that more than half the people who had used LimeWire did not go to another illegal music site to get their music after the shutdown. So while the most important anti-piracy strategy remains innovation, experimenting and working with our technology and internet partners on consumer-friendly new business models, we also need some enforcement. So how are we protecting our rights these days? By forging voluntary marketplace agreements with internet partners. Just last year, we announced a voluntary program with ISPs to address illegal downloads on P2P networks. We also helped craft an agreement with major credit card companies to reduce sales of counterfeit and pirated goods. And just last month, major advertisers and ad agencies announced a series of voluntary best practices designed to stop enriching rogue website operators. We hope other intermediaries, like search engines, will follow suit to do their part in preventing the theft of U.S. creativity. These voluntary programs are not a panacea, but collectively we think these collaborative efforts will make a difference. Speaking of working together, I would be remiss if I didn't take this opportunity to once again point out a glaring inequity when it comes to compensating creators. Every platform that legally plays music pays to do so, except for one. AM/FM radio stations use music just like internet radio, cable music channels, and satellite radio services do. The difference is that all these other radio services compensate artists and labels for the music they play while promoting artists at the same time. AM/FM radio does not. Yesterday, we were glad to hear that Bob Pittman, the CEO of Clear Channel, the largest radio group, stated that artists and record companies deserve to be paid and that promotion alone is not enough. It is time for the NAB to join with us in working toward an industry-wide solution to ensure that all artists and record companies are rewarded for their work. One thing remains abundantly clear. Music matters, now more than ever. Of the top 10 most followed people on Twitter, 7 are music artists. Of the top 6 videos on YouTube, 5 are music. Music remains a centrifugal force in culture and commerce, and it's only going to get stronger. It's worth creating, and it's worth protecting. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sherman. We appreciate your testimony. We'll now go to Mr. Jeff Smulyan, Chairman, President, and CEO of MS Communications. Mr. Smulyan, delighted to have you here. Please go ahead with your testimony.
Good morning, Chairman Walden, Ranking Member Eshoo, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Jeff Smulyan. I'm a Chairman and CEO of MS Communications based in Indianapolis, Indiana. I'm here today because I believe in the future of radio and cell phones and what it can mean to all Americans. I have spent many years working to get local radio station signals accessible on mobile phones. Radio chips, which are just mini radio receivers installed in a cell phone, are literally the size of a Tic Tac, cost pennies, and can give you the ability to listen to your favorite local radio station wherever you may be. Now let me start by dispelling a myth that has been repeated by my friends in the wireless industry. Neither I nor the NAB is pursuing a legislative mandate that radio chips be included in phones. We are not asking for a mandate. What I am committed to pursuing is an education campaign to explain the enormous benefits that come from installing radio chips in mobile devices and activating the ones that are already in phones today. Radio chips are the definition of consumer-friendly. Today, mobile customers are streaming music through apps they've downloaded, but in the process, they are possibly racking up hefty charges to their data plans. You see, when you stream music, you're using the Internet, and the wireless carriers charge you for that access. And as most of you know, unlimited data plans are ending for most carriers. A radio chip, on the other hand, picks up the free over-the-air broadcast signal. The chip turns your device into a handheld radio. So a radio chip provides mobile phone consumers with a way to listen to music and information for free without meeting and exceeding their growing data caps. Giving mobile phone users cost-free options is a definition of consumer-friendly ideas and something we hope that the cellular industry can certainly embrace. Something in which this committee should be particularly interested in are the spectrum efficiencies that can be gained from integrating radio chips into mobile devices. Pandora alone said its listeners streamed over 3 billion hours of music in the last quarter. That doesn't even include the additional hours for popular sites like iHeart or TuneIn or my own stations. Music streaming, which uses the Internet, is part of the reason we have a very congested broadband system. A radio chip utilizing the free over-the-air radio signal can offload traffic from congested broadband markets, helping relieve what we know are significant and growing spectrum demands. And now, FM chips use less than 20% of the battery life that streaming requires. Finally, and most importantly, there are tremendous public safety reasons for putting radio chips in cell phones and activating the chips that are already in there. As we have seen during times of crisis, radio broadcasters stay on the air with the use of generators when mobile phone users are often left with devices that are unable to make calls or send emails due to an overwhelmed cellular system. Even more important, when the power grid goes down, the cell system is off. Since most broadcasters have emergency generators, we are able to provide life-saving information at the times of greatest peril. I appreciate that the CTIA has embraced the commercial mobile alert system, but the system limits emergency warnings to a 90-character text that lacks the kind of detail desperately needed by citizens during an emergency. In a life and death situation, the importance of redundancy of information cannot be overstated. If you think a 90-character text message is sufficient, if it gets through at all, ask the people in Joplin, Missouri, or New Orleans, or the people in Owensboro, or the people in Fargo, or the people who have endured any major crisis in this country. The real irony here is that if educated about radio chips, consumers want them. According to a recent Harris Interactive poll, 81% of those polled who own a mobile phone would consider paying a small one-time fee to access their local radio stations. Curiously, many cell phones in the U.S. already have the radio chip embedded in the phone. These chips just haven't been activated. I'm holding here two Samsung Galaxy Notes, the one from the UK and this one from the U.S. They look identical, but the UK version has activated a radio chip. You can listen to any FM station in Washington right now on it. The U.S. version actually has a radio chip, but that chip has been deactivated. We agree with CTIA. We should let the market decide. Just as in the rest of the world, where over 1 billion phones have been sold with radios, but that market has been closed in this country. The good news is that the consumer experience is only getting better. The brand new state-of-the-art HD radio chip was recently unveiled. This low-powered, low-cost, high-processing chip uses an app which allows a user to tune to their local stations. The HD chip offers song tagging features and delivers an interactive radio, which benefits the listeners, the advertisers, the wireless industry, and consumers. It's a true win-win. For all of the reasons I've discussed, I believe the time is now for a reasonable and factual discussion on the merits of radio-enabled mobile phones. I look forward to working with this committee on this issue, and I thank you for your invitation.
Mr. Smulyan, thank you for your testimony and for being here today. We'll now go to Mr. Stephen W. Newberry, President, CEO of Commonwealth Broadcasting Corporation. Mr. Newberry, we're delighted to have you here today as well. Please go ahead with your testimony.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Eshoo, and other members of the committee. My name is Steve Newberry, and I am President and CEO of Commonwealth Broadcasting Corporation, which operates 24 stations in rural Kentucky. The future of audio is a broad title for a hearing, but as a radio broadcaster who has been in the business since I was 14 years old, I believe the future of radio broadcasting is extraordinarily bright. Not only does radio provide free entertainment, but the radio industry is responsible for hundreds of thousands of jobs, delivers crucial information in times of crises, reaches deeply into the underserved communities of our country, and gives back to its listeners in every local American community. There are more than 14,000 local radio stations across our country. With a growing audience, over 270 million Americans listen to radio every week, one of the most popular entertainment options anywhere. What makes broadcast radio so enduring is its local programming, its connection to its community. Radio works because it forms relationships with its listeners. That's how we differentiate ourselves from all the other audio platforms. We are far more than just music, far more than just news and information. We are part of the fabric of American culture and its families. The future of radio is in maintaining our commitment to localism. As an industry, we're investing in going digital. There are now over 2,000 HD stations providing crystal clear, static-free audio to listeners with HD radio receivers. We're leveraging the internet and streaming our radio content so no matter where you are, you can tune into your favorite local radio station. We're pushing to get our free signals available on all mobile devices, so in times of emergencies, when broadband and cellular systems may fail, Americans in distress can still access critical emergency alert and response information. But, as bright as our future is, radio still has our challenges. A major issue for radio is one we call the performance tax. As you may know, the recording industry would like Congress to require radio stations to pay for every song we play over the air, songs we provide to our listeners for free. We believe the value of the promotion an artist and record label receive from free radio airplay is equal to and exceeds the value of the music. In fact, for decades, radio airplay has been and continues to be the best friend of artists and record labels. Airplay exposes new music and artists to millions of Americans every day for free, and it is the engine that drives the sale of music. That's why the system has worked for over 90 years. And Congress also believes the current system works. When this issue was at its height in the 111th Congress, the Local Radio Freedom Act, which opposed any performance tax on local radio, had over 260 co-sponsors of bipartisan nature in the House and 26 in the Senate. In 2010, in the spirit of wanting to work out a fair compromise, we sat down with our friends in the music industry, and for months we worked to hammer out a potential agreement. We believe we made a fair, good faith offer, but unfortunately the Music First Coalition declined our offer and never returned to the negotiating table. Since November of 2010, we have been ready to sit down, roll up our sleeves, and work to find common ground that properly recognizes the promotional value that broadcasters provide and the value of the music. Yesterday, a negotiated royalty deal between Clear Channel Radio and Big Machine Records was announced. As I understand the details, Clear Channel has agreed to pay a percentage of advertising revenue for Big Machine songs, whether they're heard digitally or terrestrially. It is a free enterprise transaction between two willing partners with no government involvement. From NAB's perspective, nothing about this deal changes our strong opposition to a congressionally mandated performance tax. What this announced deal really does highlight is the major challenge we face as radio continues to grow online and into other new platforms. The current royalty structure for webcasting is broken. When initially set in 2007 and then built upon in 2009, the rates set by the Copyright Royalty Board were universally decried as being ridiculously high. So high, radio stations cannot afford to be successful online. The more listeners you attract, the less profitable it becomes. Believe me, radio broadcasters want to take advantage of all the possibility that the Internet presents, but these royalty rates create a financial disincentive to webcast. And solving this problem for broadcasters is essential. If we want music streaming to survive, we need to find a way to strike a better balance between royalty payments and platform growth, which at the end of the day will help broadcasters and artists. In summary, the future of radio is strong. New technologies like HD, a robust, ubiquitous delivery platform of local, over-the-air, freely delivered radio stations, and new delivery methods will enable radio to serve our local listeners for decades to come. I believe local broadcast radio has a very bright future, and I am very proud to be a part of that industry. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Newberry, thank you for your testimony on this issue. We'll now go to Mr. Westergren, who is the Chief Strategy Officer and founder of Pandora. We're delighted to have you here, sir. Please go ahead with your comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning. My name is Tim Westergren. I'm the founder and Chief Strategy Officer of Pandora. 12 years ago, after spending my 20s and early 30s playing in rock bands and composing film scores, I founded a music discovery service to help independent musicians like me find their audiences. I had a vision that by marrying musicology and technology, I could solve the great problem of music discovery, how to help listeners find new music to love, and how to bring all these talented artists the attention and careers they deserve. It took 6 long years before the Music Genome Project finally found its home in the form of Pandora. We have gone from a cramped studio apartment in South San Francisco, financed through salary deferral, credit card debt, and lots of it, and the extraordinary effort of a talented group of musicians and engineers, to the country's largest internet radio service, with over 150 million registered listeners and close to 600 employees in offices all across the country. We stream more hours of music every month on Pandora than YouTube streams hours of video, and refer more music sales to iTunes and Amazon than virtually any other service in the world. Today, more than ever, the dream of connecting listeners and artists seems within our grasp. Thanks to Pandora's Music Genome Project and its rich understanding of musical recordings, Pandora now plays the music of over 90,000 artists, 70% of them independent, represented by a catalog of over 1 million songs. And over 95% of these songs play every month. Let me repeat that. Over 950,000 unique songs play every month on Pandora. And the music spans hundreds of genres that are rarely heard in any medium. Bluegrass, big band, classic country, klezmer, New Orleans jazz, you name it. For most of these artists, Pandora is the only radio they've ever enjoyed. It is conceivable that this new promotional vehicle, if it continues to grow, may eventually lead to the emergence of a musician's middle class. We have created a democratic and inclusive form of radio that listeners can access the same way they listen to terrestrial broadcasting. 7 of the world's largest automakers now include Pandora in new models. We are embedded in over 650 consumer electronics devices that enable Pandora to be enjoyed throughout people's homes. We're the second most downloaded iPhone app and one of the most popular iPad apps. Pandora is even built into refrigerators. Long gone are the days when customers accessed internet radio only through their PCs or laptops. In fact, over 70% of our listening now takes place off the computer. But beneath this exciting transition is a severe and fundamental problem. While Pandora and other internet radio services compete directly with broadcast and satellite radio for listeners in every place you find music, the home, the car, the office, and on the go, we are subject to an astonishingly disproportionate royalty burden compared to these other formats. All forms of radio play songwriters a very similar percentage of revenue, but there are enormous differences in how performing artists and labels are compensated. Last year, on revenues of $274 million, Pandora paid 50% of that revenue in performance fees. That same year, SiriusXM, on revenues of $2.74 billion, paid 7.5% of revenue, and broadcast radio, on revenues of roughly $15 billion, paid 0. Just to be clear, we are fully supportive of fair compensation for artists. We strongly believe that radio can and should reward musicians for the use of their work, both songwriters and performers. But this lack of a level playing field is fundamentally unfair and indefensible. So why the disparity in royalties? The inequity arises from the fact that Congress have made decisions about radio and copyright law in a piecemeal and isolated manner. As each new form of radio transmission was invented, new legislation was passed, but only to address the new form. The effect has been to penalize new media and advantage old media when setting the rules for music royalties. To give you a sense of how absurd the current situation is, consider this example. Drivers of most current Ford cars can receive AM/FM, satellite, and internet radio all through the vehicle's sound system. If a song is delivered over AM/FM, the associated performing artist and label receive no compensation. If the song is delivered over satellite, the performing artist and label do receive compensation. But if the song is delivered using internet transmission over 3G or 4G, then the effective percentage of revenue that must be paid by the company delivering the song goes up sixfold. It's the same song, same car, and the same sound system. It's time for Congress to level the playing field and to approach radio royalties in a technology-neutral manner. The current rate-setting law is unfair to performing artists, unfair to record labels, and unfair to internet radio as we compete every day with broadcast and satellite radio for listener loyalty and advertising and subscription revenue. What amounts to a subsidy of entrenched radio media stifles innovation, discriminates against the internet, and adversely affects consumers. It is time to unshackle innovation and allow new technologies and new forms of audio consumption to compete fairly. Thank you for your time and consideration. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Westgren, both for your testimony and for your creativity. Mr. Christopher Gutman McCabe is next, Vice President, Regulatory Affairs of CTIA. Good morning. We're delighted to have you here, and we look forward to your testimony, sir.
Thank you, and good morning, Chairman Walden, Ranking Member Eshoo, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you again for the opportunity to participate in this morning's hearing. CTIA believes the future of audio is mobile. It is personal. It is what the consumer wants it to be, and it is bright. The consumer's desire is a theme that you will hear from me throughout my testimony. I want to share some of the reasons we feel this way, as well as a few suggestions for how to ensure that our optimistic projection turns out to be true. As mobile broadband becomes ubiquitous, the mobile platform provides a compelling opportunity for artists and entrepreneurs to deliver all sorts of audio products. No matter where their interests lie, consumers can and will be able to access content of their choosing, tailored to their preferences at that moment. This shift from a producer and distributor-driven model to a consumer-driven model will test existing businesses and force them to adapt. We see this in the way that the music and news-gathering business, for instance, are being transformed by the twin forces of digitization and disintermediation. This is a challenge for some in the old order, in much the same way that telephony was a challenge for the telegraph and wireless is a challenge for wired. At the same time, these forces are unleashing a wave of creativity and innovation that is giving rise to new businesses like Pandora, thank you, Tim, Spotify, and TuneIn, all of which are on my phone, none of which yet are on my refrigerator. It is morphing communications devices into music devices and enabling services like Cricket's Move. While many of those of us who grew up in the age of the LP lament the loss of album art and liner notes, this transformation is one that is good for consumers, and it's good for America. Consumers gain control as they can choose the time and the method by which their content is delivered or accessed. And America wins because it is at the center of this transformation. America is the epicenter of the development of these new services, and we are the world's undisputed leader in wireless broadband. So what needs to be done to enable continued American leadership in this area and ensure that the future of audio is indeed bright? The short answer is that we must continue to have access to spectrum, the highway across which audio traffic moves, and we need a light regulatory touch that permits services and applications providers to experiment with new product offerings and new pricing structures. Policymakers need to resist calls to use government to protect business models that find themselves subject to new competitive challenges. I want to expand a bit on this last point, as I know that some in the radio industry will use this hearing as an opportunity to reiterate their call for wireless device to include FM chips or some other type of commercial radio capability. This effort should be rejected. To be clear, CTI is not opposed to including FM capabilities in wireless devices. If you listen to Mr. Smolian's testimony, one would think that the capability that he seeks does not exist. It does. Indeed, at least 59 wireless devices today have an FM chip included. But the decision to offer FM capability or not should be driven by consumer preference, not government fiat. A mandate would be at odds with the idea that a competitive marketplace does a superior job of delivering products and services that consumers value. Our members provide phones with and without radio capability, just as they provide handsets with and without keypads, with or without cameras, and devices with or without Internet access capabilities. This differentiation allows consumers to find what they want and what they value, rather than taking any phone as long as it's black and connected to the wall, as was once the norm. And so, if some in the radio business want to encourage consumers to buy FM-enabled devices, they are free to do so, but they should not seek to have the government impose their business plan on others. The Commercial Mobile Service Alert Advisory Committee's conclusion, by a vote of 41-1, that FM is not appropriate for wireless emergency alerts was correct, and thus decisions regarding the inclusion of FM capability in wireless devices must be driven by commercial factors. As today's audio sector demonstrates, reliance on the churn and the ingenuity of the marketplace will force better product outcomes for platform providers, content creators, and consumers alike. Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to appear on the panel. With the right combination of good spectrum policy and regulatory restraint, reliance on the innovative capabilities of American entrepreneurs, and trust that consumers know what they want, the future of audio is and should remain bright. Thank you.
Mr. Scott-McCabe, thank you for your testimony, and we'll conclude our panel with Mr. Shapiro, who is the President and CEO of the Consumer Electronics Association. Mr. Shapiro, welcome to our committee again, and we look forward to your testimony.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. We represent over 2,000 U.S. consumer electronics companies, every one of which directly or indirectly touches or relies on or sells sound or audio. And we welcome this hearing because it's very gratifying to see Congress focusing on something we cherish, but we rarely discuss in Washington, the spoken word, music and sound. And we are pleased to share our views. First, I'm proud that many of our members make loudspeakers and other audio products here in the United States and export worldwide. Audiophiles around the globe actually recognize and appreciate the phenomenal quality of these U.S. products, including scores of great companies, both large and small. Second, the popularity of American culture and products abroad ties in directly with this type of innovation, including innovation in both audio, music, and word as our national brand. If we can continue to innovate, our economy will continue to grow and mitigate our tax and spending dilemma. Of course, the challenge of innovation, including innovation in technology in music and news distribution, is that innovation always threatens incumbents, and they too often come to Washington to protect their legacy business models. Third, the world of reproduced audio parallels the world of energy in that just a few decades ago we had a few choices. It was radio or television or telephone in terms of reproduced sound. Well, as we've heard from many witnesses and the members in their opening statements, things have changed dramatically. And just like with energy, we suggest an all-of-the-above policy, which means that no one source should be given preferential treatment over all others. For this reason alone, we are puzzled why Congress favors broadcast radio over every other source of audio. Fourth, the phenomenal growth in digital video, the resulting flattening of TV screens, and the high quality of the displays has created huge opportunities in and demand for quality audio, and that's a big shift. And corresponding to that is advancements in the science of sound reproduction, which is changing the world of audio. What we're starting to see in the next generation is streaming surround sound audio, which will solve a lot of problems and create a lot of opportunities. Now, if you think about it, music is the only area where millions of people still spend hours enjoying creativity from hundreds of years ago. But the fact is that our best times are still ahead of us, not only with content creation, but with devices, and in terms of solving some of our problems. For example, we have products that are starting to appeal to an aging population. Audio solutions that provide amplification and sound clarity will emerge through such devices as phones and headsets. In fact, we have initiated a standards project to enable people with hearing impairments to adjust audio presentation for their specific needs. We also are focusing on health maintenance, socialization, and service to remote, aging, and other populations. Related to this is an area of concern we haven't heard about today, and that's what we can do collectively to educate Americans about the importance of protecting their hearing. Since 1981, most reputable headphone makers have warned about playing music too loud, and CEA has joined with the RIAA, the American Speech Language Hearing Association, and others in a national campaign aimed at ensuring children and parents learn very early to value hearing as a very precious sense which must be protected. We don't seek your action, but we do ask you to use your bully pulpit. Now, clearly, the audio marketplace for music and information is vibrant. We've been hearing about that the last hour. Innovations are entering very quickly, and thriving new business models are being created. Consumers are the winners here, and new businesses. But with all of the advances in audio distribution and consumption, it troubles me that we're still fighting efforts to mandate the incorporation of old technologies and new products, namely radio broadcasters, which they have been doing in writing and lobbying, seeking Congress to intervene in the marketplace and require analog radio receivers be installed in a host of digital devices. The fact is that analog radio and digital phones is not popular with consumers. And if you look at independent research, the fact is consumers are not choosing and they're not surveying saying they want to buy them. In fact, all the products out there are not generally being used. And the argument for them, all of a sudden this new argument about emergencies, frankly defies logic. First, many, if not most, radio stations do not operate 24 hours in attended mode with live human beings present. In a famous 2002 disaster, a train carrying deadly toxic chemicals derailed near Minot, North Dakota. No emergency alert was sent out because no one at the stations nearby could be reached by phone. Second, in the event of an emergency, what people are going to do? Well, they'll use their phones, they'll use their internet devices, they could go to their home radio, their car radio, they could access the internet or platforms such as Facebook and Twitter. These provide more specialized and localized information that is more helpful than a generalized radio update. Finally, as we heard earlier, there's already a solution in place that is the federal government has required, which basically requires text alerts to telephones. We oppose a mandate for FM chips and cell phones, but also the current effort to simply get a study. Taxpayers should not be spending money about why there should be mandates. And we applaud you, Representative Eshoo, and your Congressman Iser for introducing HCR 42, which opposes the FM chip. Innovation is driving our economy, and nowhere is this truer than the audio industry. Hardware makers, online innovators, and artists are all taking advantage of new business opportunities. We urge Congress to ignore self-interested pleas from declining industries and continue to promote a vibrant and dynamic free market economy that creates investment and jobs. And we look forward to working with you in these efforts. Thank you very much.
Mr. Shapiro, thank you for your testimony. Now we're going to go into our question phase. We welcome everyone to take on these questions. Mr. Allison, I know not all the details are out yet, but I'd like to hear you elaborate on what you know of the Clear Channel Big Machine Agreement from the artist's perspective. And are you supportive of without, I obviously some of the details aren't out, but the concepts?
Well, I mean, I think what's interesting about it is it seems to kind of open the door. I mean, here we have one of the biggest broadcaster conglomerate in America basically agreeing that a performance right should exist.
Okay.
So I think it kind of diminishes the argument that this right should not exist.
Mr. Sherman, could you tackle that same question just from what you know?
We're obviously delighted that the biggest radio group has acknowledged that something should be done and has actually gone and done something. I mean, that's a breakthrough. We've been advocating for this for about 80 years, so obviously it's very important. But we need an industry-wide solution, not a label-by-label piecemeal solution, and we don't know whether other radio groups will feel the same economic motivation to do a deal. So we need to come up with something broader.
Thank you. Mr. Newberry, would you like to comment on it as well?
Mr. Chairman, I don't know the specifics of the transaction, but I think what should be pointed out was, and I referenced this in my statement, it was a free market transaction. So to Mr. Allison's point, I don't believe that Clear Channel simply made a statement about the performance rights as much as they entered a transaction and received something back in return for that. What did encourage me as much as anything was that it appeared to be a universal solution that addressed the digital expense that company is incurring. So I think that needs to be measured as part of the analysis of that transaction that occurred.
Appreciate that. I'd like to ask unanimous consent to enter into the record this February 2012 statement by the NAB saying the association does not support an FM chip mandate. Without objection, so ordered. Mr. Smulyan, your written statement also makes clear you're not seeking an FM chip mandate. If you're not looking for legislation, can you tell us what you are looking for?
We're looking for an honest assessment evaluation. I take issue with Mr. Shapiro's statement. We don't want to study this. We think it's an issue that needs to be studied. We are, as an industry, open to negotiations with the wireless industry. We're engaged in those now. We think the more people understand this issue, both on the wireless side and the consumer side and here in Congress and at the FCC, that they'll understand that this is an idea this time has come.
Mr. Shamiro mentioned that we were talking about analog radio, I think, in your comments. But you also mentioned there's a newly developed HD digital chip.
Right. We've actually developed an HD chip along with Intel and Ubiquity through the sponsorship of the NAB. And we're now demonstrating that. We previewed it at the NAB convention. And not only does it provide HD and all the attendant benefits, but it also provides a back channel for commerce where consumers can hear an ad on the air, download a coupon, walk into a store. They can find out the location of events. They can find out the time of events, calendar them. We think there's some remarkable benefits to this. The HD chip really does a lot more. There have been well over 1 billion analog phones sold with radios in them around the world. This is the next generation.
Right. Mr. Newberry, there was a comment made about unattended operation in a situation in North Dakota. Are you familiar with that one, and can you tell us your perspective from a broadcaster what happened there?
I am. It's Minot, I believe, would be the pronunciation. It is a situation that occurred that the station had provided the phone number to the emergency personnel, and unfortunately, the emergency services personnel there dialed the wrong number. So they were unable to reach the station personnel. But many stations in rural America do operate unattended at night. Mr. Chairman, it is an economic reality, and it's much like volunteer fire departments in rural America. Just because someone's not sitting at the fire department 24 hours a day does not mean that those firefighters are not willing to answer the call 24 hours a day when that emergency occurs. Yep. But all of us have abilities, and I can go online from here with my phone, and I could broadcast live on my station from this location now if I needed to.
And from my own experience, I know we were 24/7 and unattended, but we weren't the primary station. But we were set up so the primary station, when it triggered all of our stations to do the alert. And so we used to sign off at 11 o'clock at night, like a lot of stations did, so you wouldn't even be on the air. Now we're 24/7. I'm out of the business. But
if I could make a point, I think that's the dilemma that broadcasters face. We could sign our stations off the air at 10 o'clock at night. Mm-hmm. And not have anyone there and not provide any service, or we can provide service 24 hours a day and have a very solid emergency plan to make sure that our station is responsive in those overnight hours.
Thank you very much. My time has expired. Now turn to the gentlelady from California, Ms. Eshu.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all of the witnesses. I think that we had an excellent array of testimony on several subjects. I want to first go to Mr. Smolian. But before I do, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask unanimous consent that I have two pieces to place in the record. One, an annual consumer survey data 2012, and the other activity and data use in megabits, which I think are pertinent to our hearing.
Without objection.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Smolian, you've been very clear that the broadcasters are not seeking to mandate radio chips in mobile devices.
Right.
But you've also raised the issue that in the European market, what you would like to see in the American market is flourishing, but you are essentially blocked by the wireless industry. Right. Now, I think that consumers have a lot to do with this, most frankly. And one of the pieces that I just asked to be placed in the record is really instructive. But I'd like to hear your reaction to it. This is the 2012 edition of a bipartisan survey that was conducted by McLaughlin and Associates and the Penn Show in Berlin of 1,000 adults. And what it asks of the people that were contacted, other than making or receiving voice calls, which one of the following cell phone features is most important to you? And there's a long list: texting, internet access, email, a whole long list. And it goes across all age groups from 18 to over 65. Now, of the some 12 or 14 choices, FM radio chipset. You know what? It's 0 across the board.
Right.
So how do you square that off with your testimony? I mean, you make it sound like that there's something that tens of millions of people are clamoring for, and yet consumers across the board in this are saying, "Niet."
It's interesting.
It is
interesting. It's interesting you say "niet" because you have a free market probably in the Soviet Union for this issue. We don't have one here. In the rest of the world,
but you use the word, the free market. This is consumers saying that they have no interest in it. You don't want to mandate. Consumers are not interested. Now, I mean, I think that if you can get people to put this in the sets, and people can make up their minds, I don't have any problem with that, and I'm glad you don't want it mandated. But I do think it's interesting that consumers across the board, from the ages of 18 to 29, 30 to 40, 41 to 55, 56 to 65, and over 65, of all these categories, are not interested in it. It's 0.
Interestingly enough, in this country, consumers aren't aware of this issue. It has become ubiquitous in the rest of the world. If you go into a phone store in London or
well, let me ask CTIA or the wireless people or Mr. Gutman McCabe, do you block this? Are you not allowing access to this?
No, Ranking Member, and I think that's the point I tried to make in my original testimony. There's almost a sense here that these devices don't exist. And we had an intern yesterday spend 25 minutes and found 59 devices. And then we sent him out at lunchtime to go to Best Buy, and he picked up the Best Buy catalog, which we use a lot. There are 26 devices in the center pullout section of the Best Buy catalog. That's a third of the devices in that section are FM chip enabled. But what we are hearing from our manufacturers is the point that you made earlier, which is we're not seeing consumer demand for it, and yet it's right here in the center of Best Buy. It's not available.
That there are 40 phone models on the market today with the chip. So there's a discrepancy here, but it seems to me, long short, that there's not consumer demand for it. That's my take on it.
We have a survey.
Let me I just have 6 seconds left. I'd like to thank Mr. Westergarten for what you've done. It's inspiring. What's the kind of royalty regime you're advocating for?
we're advocating for a technology-neutral regime. So give us all the same starting point, the same language, the same criteria, and let the chips fall where they may. We're not coming to you asking you for a specific rate.
Good expression.
Yeah, forgive me for that. I didn't mean to do that. Yeah, just something that's technology-neutral.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Now recognize the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Shimkus, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I go in this round of questions with a lot of trepidation because they're all my friends, and it was a great panel. But obviously there's struggles, and many of you know who've come to the committee numerous times, and I'm a late adopter of technology. I still have teenage sons, so they push me to see what really the consumer, that's who's driving this. The youth moves fast, it moves quick, you can't control it. But I am, one thing that was raised that just an observation of the youth of our society right now is I think this hearing thing is an important thing, because they walk around now with headphones all the time, whether they're gaming or whether they're listening to streaming, maybe Pandora, but then it's Bluetooth over a headset device. I mean, I don't know how we really get a handle on that. But I deal with a lot of Korean vets and World War II vets who didn't have earplugs in when the artillery cannons fired, and hearing loss is a struggle for a lot of our society. So I don't know. I just put that on the record as something that I see my son, and I try to listen to make sure that it's not overly burdensome. I'm going to tactfully steer away from some issues, but and you know how tactful I am, so that's really in my local community, not in my district, but next door, they have art on the square, and there was a story, and it's been very successful the last couple of years. One of the stories was how from an iPhone you could debit your payment with an app and a little connection device. And I've seen it happen a couple times too. Credit card readers, thank you. Pretty good technology, wouldn't you say, Mr. Shapiro?
It's terrific. It's a dongle, yeah.
And how did that evolve?
Evolved because innovators saw an opportunity. They solved a problem. I mean, Apple does a great job in their stores of getting you in and out of there without going to a cash register, and their stores are always full. I mean, there's a vibrant marketplace, obviously, for innovation in our country, and we lead the world in it, and that should be our strategy. So every policy you look at, I suggest you focus on, will it be good or bad for innovation? Will it, as I think was Congressman Eshu said so eloquently, technology mandates choke off innovation. That's just a fact, and that's what we have to be cautious about.
And I was called yesterday by a reporter, and Anna would appreciate this, from the Dallas Morning News, who's following CMAS and digital texting of warning alerts based upon legislation passed in about 2006, the WARN Act, which, so to Mr. Gutman McCabe, right there, you were shaking your head, if I'm emailing or surfing the internet on my smartphone, would I still receive a CMAS alert?
Yeah, yes, sir. You will get a distinctive tone. It will alert you to it, and it will pop up on your device. You do not have to do anything proactive. It is not an opt-in service. It's a service that will come to you, and by legislation, you will get the 3 classes of alerts. You can later decide not to receive 2 of the 3, but you will proactively, without any effort on your behalf, receive those alerts.
Which is a really good application. I had to remember what in the heck we did on a piece of legislation and try to remember. And I always fall back to my days in the Army infantry on West German soil when we were worried. The information we needed to have was, which direction do we need to go in case there's an emergency and a disaster, and that texting ability is critical. Mr. Westergren, you may not want to answer this question because it's top secret information. I'm a Pandora user when I run, 70s era. I'm interested how many people opt out, or what percentage of people eventually go back and say, I don't want these advertisements. I want the $3 a month with uninterrupted. How many?
It's a very, very low single-digit percentage subscribe.
So most people will put up with the ads or two every 3 to 5 songs.
No, the vast majority, yes.
Okay. My time's Mr. See, I successfully treaded this without causing too much damage, so I'll yield back my time.
We'll make note of that in the record as a first-time occurrence. Now turn to Mr. Doyle, right? I think Mr. Doyle is next.
Thank you,
4 or
Mr.
5
Chairman.
minutes.
Mr. Newberry, I know there's been a lot of talk today about royalties and other issues, but I was looking at your written testimony, and about a third of it was devoted to FCC implementation of low-power FM and regarding power levels and second adjacent waivers. And I'd just like to ask you a few questions for the record. You agree that the FCC regulates operating hours for radio stations, right?
That they regulate operating hours?
Does the FCC regulate operating hours for radio stations?
Yes, sir.
And does it regulate what kind of antenna stations can use?
Not what model. It does set a technical requirement for the station, but it does not specify a model.
And it regulates underwriting and or advertising?
For public stations, yes.
Yeah. So are any of these issues addressed in the Local Community Radio Act?
There are power requirements that are addressed in there. There are specifications in terms of what the restrictions on the power for the low-power stations would be. I haven't read that act in detail for some period of time.
I'll help you out there since I wrote it. So it's not in
there.
No. Thanks. Now, you mentioned in your written testimony you think FCC should not allow LPFM stations to increase their power levels from 100 watts to 250 watts because power levels are not mentioned in the Local Community Radio Act. The Local Community Radio Act was written to address the issuing of insuring licenses for LPFM. There's lots of other issues related to LPFM that aren't discussed in the bill, like power levels, but also operating hours, antennas, programming, and everything else the FCC has the authority to determine. I just want to make the argument for you that 250-watt service is still a very localized service compared to the 50,000 and 100,000-watt full-power stations. So, and in fact, translator stations routinely operate at 250 watts at greater tower heights than LPFM without any problems. So I guess my question is, as long as LPFMs are still required to operate under the same very strict interference protections required by the Local Community Radio Act, what difference would it make if LPFMs run at a higher power level as long as they don't interfere with neighboring stations?
Mr. Doyle, that would be comparable to if I have a radio station that has 25,000 watts of power, but it wouldn't interfere with someone, so I could arbitrarily increase that power to whatever level I could reach my contours without causing interference. That's not the way the system has been devised. That's not the way the system is operated. There are classes of stations. You have maximum power within each of those classes of stations, and that's how the FCC has operated for years. It's not get as much space or coverage as I can. It's operate a particular class of radio.
Sure, but you acknowledge translators run at 250 watts and there's not interference problems.
Yes, sir. It's a different class of station.
Yeah, I understand, but I'm just saying that since we already know that translators run at that wattage without causing interference problems, it wouldn't be an interference issue. I mean, if the issue is interference, do you think that somehow a low-power FM station operating at 250 watts would cause interference that a translator wouldn't?
Well, I think the issue is what the intent of the Act of 2010 was, that the NAB did go on record supporting and we advocated for, and that was that these were to be micro stations that covered particular neighborhoods, a 100-watt station at 100 feet, and that is what the class of station that was authorized by that Act.
Thanks.
And that would be NAB's position, just asking that that spirit of that legislation be continued.
Thank you. Let me ask you about the second adjacent frequency waivers, too. The Act says that the FCC may only grant an LPFM station a second adjacent waiver if that station, and I'll quote the Act, will not result in interference to any authorized radio service. So a second adjacent frequency waiver cannot be granted to an LPFM station that might cause interference to any radio station, no matter how far away, even outside that station's protective listening range. And if interference somehow happens anyway, the LPFM must suspend operations immediately. This is a much stronger standard than full power stations have to abide by. So what I want to ask, in your written testimony, you propose that a full power station should be able to review the second adjacent waiver application of an LPFM station. This is on top of the already exhaustive interference protections that are enacted by the Local Community Radio Act. I'm just curious why you find it necessary to have that extra layer of scrutiny.
It goes back to the principle of the concerns of the degradation of the quality of the audio band. You can look at what happened to the AM band in this country and see why the NAB was so protective of the second adjacent channels. Third adjacent does provide enough separation between the stations that it avoids an unintended consequence of interference. Second adjacent does cause more interference. That is a fact of physics.
But you acknowledge the Act requires them to shut down immediately. If
right.
That's the case.
And what we're asking is that broadcasters have the opportunity to be proactive and avoid that problem, so that our listeners are not that the listeners are not interfered with their habits of listening to our station.
But our experience has been that translators, which are higher than 100 watts, that only about 5% of translators have had to move or go off the air as a result of this kind of scenario that you're describing. So I'm just curious, since it doesn't seem to be a big problem, and we've not had any issues with it, or very few issues with it, why you see the need for the extra layer of scrutiny. But I see my time is run out. And
I'd let you respond.
If you want to.
I would respond again by saying a different class of stations with different license intentions through the Act of 2010.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Doyle. We'll now turn to the gentlelady from California, Ms. Bono Mack, for 5 minutes for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for this exciting, interesting hearing. It's great to have all of you here. We appreciate very much your testimony. I'm just going to start by saying how important the delivery of music has become, that I'm a firm believer that since Shimka started with dating ourselves, I'll continue on in that vein. Way back when you used to buy a car, we actually used to look under the hoods and see what was under the hood of a car, what kind of engine they had. Nobody cares any longer, but we care what's in the dash. And that's the most important thing, whether it's Pandora or whatever it is. We're now buying the two things, the gadgetry and the cup holders, I'm convinced. But my first question is to Mr. Israelite and then to Mr. Sherman and to Mr. Allison. Is there a lot of discussion with broadening the definition of a sync right?
The synchronization right, where you marry the music with video, is growing in importance for a lot of reasons. Obviously, things like professionally produced music videos are becoming more popular. They're making income now. YouTube, user-generated content postings. And so it's becoming a very much more important income stream for songwriters. The good news is that it's in a free market. Our rights are not governed by consent decrees or compulsory licenses, so we get to negotiate the value of that, which is a wonderful thing. And in many instances, the songwriter gets 50% of the revenue with the record label and artist when we're both in a free market. That's a wonderful thing for songwriters. The challenge is we're not built to license it. And so one of the things that we've been discussing among some of the interested parties is how we can set up a system that doesn't change the free market nature of licensing synchronizations, but can make it more efficient, so that when you need a mass amount of synchronizations, there's a way to license it. And we had a pretty big groundbreaking deal with YouTube that NMPA entered into, which I think can be a model for how to do this for the future.
Thank you. Mr. Sherman?
Excuse me. I agree with what David has said, and there are uses of sync now that are well beyond anything at the level historically. For example, it's very common now to release music videos as part of an album. So we need more of an ability to license that stuff easily than the current system allows. So we have been having conversations to figure out how to do that. There's a lot of resistance to doing it under existing copyright law like Section 115, but we're trying to find alternatives.
Would you just either one of you care to clarify the difference between a YouTube version of Lady Gaga performing, for example, one of her songs, and then I just pulled up on YouTube, now there's just various fans with, 50 million views of his song. Is there a difference whether it's Lady Gaga herself or if it's a fan performing that song, and how those two would be treated?
Yes, actually, there's quite a big difference. Right now, when a record label releases a professionally produced music video, it will license to YouTube or through Vivo the entirety of the licensing, so that all of the money that gets paid goes to the record label, and the record label then is responsible for licensing and paying the songwriters. Sometimes that's happening, sometimes it's not, and we're going to address that. When a user posts a video that includes that music, or for example does a cover song, then the person posting it is supposed to have the responsibility of getting that licensing. And one of the things that we're trying to work out with YouTube is that for advertising that is now placed on those videos, YouTube is now actually paying directly the music publisher and songwriter for the use of that composition. And so that is a tremendous step forward from where we were just a few years ago, when that music was being used and the songwriter wasn't seeing any income from the use. So music videos are still a challenge for us, professional ones. The user-generated, we've actually made more progress on with this type of groundbreaking deal with YouTube.
Do you want to add to the okay.
That's right.
Thank you. Like that. Mr. Allison, you were leaving tomorrow for Bonnaroo.
Yes.
That's very exciting. I don't know if you got the opportunity to play Coachella, but Coachella Festival is certainly, I hope that you'll be there next year. Can you speak a little bit about the importance of touring in relation to all of this?
Sure. Well, I mean, touring is a major part of my income. You know, it's at least half. And I'd say it's the reason I do what I do. I just want to perform. I just want to play the bass. That's my goal in life. And touring, I derive a certain percentage of my income from touring. I guess that the big problem in terms of the performing rights part of the equation is that where I will have income from touring and I'll have income as a songwriter, I don't get income, a royalty stream that is as a performer. And I work in a kind of a field where, you know, as a musician, it's very collaborative when we make recordings. We're working together, and we're giving of each other. When we are in the studio, people come up with great ideas and they throw them out there. I mean, we were talking before about the great bassist Carol Kay and how she would contribute a great bass line to a pop tune.
I know one in particular. Yeah.
May go and may go unrecognized. And you know, I guess I have. You could say I have two jobs. You know, I'm a songwriter for which I receive royalties, but I'm also a performer for which I do not receive royalties. And I'm talking about terrestrial radio here. And usually, if you have two jobs, you get two paychecks. And in this case, I don't.
Mr. Chairman, my time has expired. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, I was just saying we were going to play your music, but we don't have a copyright agreement, so we can't do that. I would turn now to the former chairman, Mr. Waxman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Shapiro, you mentioned in your testimony that advancements in audio technology have brought about more immersive, enriching experiences for listeners. Some of these technologies are relatively bandwidth intensive. Are you concerned that data caps could potentially undercut these types of consumer experiences?
Well, clearly these use more data, but generally audio uses a lot less data than video. I think the concern really is that consumers understand what they buy and there be transparency by the providers, and that also that we have enough spectrum so that we can do this with wirelessly. I think wired is less of an issue now. We do have pretty good broadband deployment and there is increasing competition. But wireless definitely needs more spectrum because we're facing a spectrum cliff. I so much appreciate what was done by Congress and signed by the President recently in terms of private broadcast incentive auctions, but that will not be enough. And I think that should be our focus, is how do we plan 5, 10 years out for the spectrum explosion? Because let's be honest, it's just not about audio and new services in audio. It's about so many things which the U.S. is leading on.
What do you think about data caps?
Pardon me?
Do you think the data caps could potentially undercut these?
I think the broadband providers have certain rights to offer their product, and the best thing we could do from a matter of public policy is to ensure vigorous competition and the consumers understand what they are buying, and it's disclosed very clearly.
Okay. Mr. Allison, you mentioned in your testimony that the Recording Academy has been very active on the issue of sound quality, which would require increased bandwidth for higher resolution streaming and downloads. Could you share with us your perspective on data caps and how they might affect your efforts in raising the level of sound quality?
I have no strong informed opinion on that. It's a little above my pay grade in terms of data caps, but I can say as a musician, you know, sound quality is essential. I think this is art is an immersive experience, and I come up in the era of vinyl records, still have them, still listen to them, and now we're recording in very high-resolution formats, 24-bit at the minimum, which sound incredible. And I think that having high-quality audio available has a lot to do with how people experience art.
Mm-hmm. Well, we hear a lot about the technology changing the business model for distributing music, but technology is also changing the business model for the artists in other ways. Have these new technologies and internet changed how you and other artists create, record, and promote your music?
Well, certainly the recording side has changed a lot as technologies emerge. You know, my first few records were recorded on 2-inch analog tape, which sounds great. The last 8 were recorded directly into a computer. So technology certainly has changed. Also, of course, as a small businessman, and that's what I am, I'm out there kind of hawking my wares, trying to get people interested in my music. Mm-hmm. I use social media quite a bit to try to get the word out. I think that's definitely transformed how musicians connect with their audience and hope to build their audience.
Mr. Westergren, you note that for many of the artists featured through your service, Pandora is the only airplay that they have ever received. Why do you think these independent artists have such a hard time getting their work on traditional radio? Have you seen changes in the traditional radio industry's willingness to feature new or independent content in the last 15 years?
I think it's sort of a fundamental feature of broadcast, and I've been a fan of broadcast radio all my life. I've listened to it and grown up with it. It can only play a single playlist at a time, and as opposed to the web, where you can stream literally millions of simultaneous, completely different radio stations. So it just has a natural, innate ability to be much more inclusive. And if I may, to Mr. Allison's comment, for touring, Pandora has the ability to alert listeners to local, lesser-known musicians when they're playing. We have email addresses and zip codes upon registration, and we've actually been experimenting with filling clubs in small cities around the U.S. by inviting people based on musical preference.
So based on their preference that they've expressed to you, you can inform them of a concert.
That's right. We hope to build a musician's middle class, like I said.
Yeah, that's very good. Well, I appreciate the comments that all the witnesses have given, and I think this has been a very important and worthwhile hearing. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Waxman. Appreciate that. Now we go to Ms. Blackburn from Tennessee for 5 minutes.
Thank you. And Mr. Allison, I hope you enjoy Bonnaroo.
I know I will.
It's a great Tennessee happening. Never been. Here it's a great happening out there. Mr. Chairman, I would like to submit for the record some testimony from a musician named David Lowry.
Without objection.
Thank you. I appreciate that. He wanted to be able to weigh in on what we were hearing today. Let me go back. I want to come to Mr. Sherman and Mr. Newberry. The chairman referenced the agreement with Big Machine and Clear Channel yesterday and talked a little bit about that. And Mr. Newberry, come on back down to Tennessee. I'll introduce you to Mr. Borchetta. He is one of my constituents. And I think that this is something that we all find interesting, and certainly it's been quite a part of the subject that we are hearing today. So I would like to hear from the two of you just very quickly, and if you want to expand on it in writing, I think that would be interesting to the committee. Let's talk about what this agreement means to each of your entities and to the future of performance rights as we move on down the line in this discussion. So very briefly now, and if you want to submit something in detail later, that's fine too. So Mr. Sherman, I'll start with you.
Well, as I said before, we don't know how many other radio stations and groups will think that this is something that they want to do. So the mere fact that Clear Channel has done this with one label doesn't solve the problem for the entire industry. We've had Deanna Warwick come and testify in Congress she's no better off today than she was yesterday, notwithstanding the Clear Channel deal with Big Machine. And most, 99.9% of the artists are not any better off.
Let me cut you off and go on to Mr. Newberry.
Congressman, I would tell you that I think it is a good thing from the standpoint it's a private enterprise transaction. It was a decision made by a private company, Clear Channel, to engage with a private company, Big Machine, and reach an agreement, terms of which I'm not privileged to, but reach an agreement that they were both satisfied with without government intervention. So it doesn't change our position that there should not be a congressionally mandated, but I do think it signifies a willingness of both sides to engage in conversations and look for solutions.
Okay. Mr. Israelite, I want to go back to your testimony, and you mentioned a more efficient licensing system for new business models. And I just want to ask you this. Do you agree that reforming Section 115 of the Copyright Code would be a good step in bringing the law up to speed with the new technologies, and what type of reforms would you like to see us in your organization like to see us follow and consider?
Well, thank you for the question. I think reforming 115 is very important. The mechanical licensing system was built on an old model where you would license one song to one record label to put out. Today, when an Apple iTunes store has 20 million tracks and others may want to open their store with that many licenses, we're not built for that right now. And I think we have some very innovative, progressive proposals to how we can change that licensing system to make that work. I would still be concerned about the existence of a compulsory license on the songwriter. It doesn't exist for the record label or artist, but the songwriter is told the value of their intellectual property, and I think once you've reformed licensing, we ought to take a look at removing that compulsory license and let the free market operate. In the performance space, we're very efficient in how we license. We have 3 performance right organizations that license very efficiently, but again, because of the existence of consent decrees, there is no free market negotiation, and I think the value for songwriters is diminished. And on the synchronization front, while there's not a consent decree and there's not a compulsory license, it is a free market exercise. I do think that reforming 115 can lead to opportunities to do a better job of licensing synchronizations in a free market. And that's basically what we've tried to do with YouTube, where there was a model deal. It was offered to all music publishers and songwriters to opt in, and we've had very good success at people voluntarily doing that. So thank you for the question. I think it's something that's very important for the future of music.
Okay. If I could just jump in, David left the impression that there are no compulsory licenses for record companies. We are actually subject to a compulsory license for Pandora and all of Internet radio. So I just want to
Precisely
make sure
that, and that was one part of the point of the question of getting to 115.
Yeah.
The reforms in 115. I do have other questions that I will submit for the record. I've got one on the FM chip. I know we're about out of time. I've got one on DMCA and Google, Mr. Sherman, that I wanted to discuss with you. And I will have to say, dealing with the FM chip, I have just pulled up WSM online here and was tempted to hit the on-air right now, listen live, so I could entertain y'all. I'll yield back.
Thank the gentlelady for her questions and her interest in this hearing, and congratulate her on this, the anniversary of her 30th birthday.
I am so pleased that you couched that so
Right, be
delicately
diplomatic here.
and gingerly.
But happy birthday. We now turn to a gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Markey, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, very much. I'd just like to have a little bit of an additional conversation on this FM chip issue. Mr. Smulian, in Europe, they include a chip in cell phones. What is the frequency of use in Europe from your perspective?
It's one of the most widely used features. What you find is when you go into a cellular store there, it's always listed. There are when the manufacturer lists the features, it's one of the most widely accepted features. We've had manufacturers say, look, for years people will pay a couple extra dollars to have an FM radio in there, and that's been true. We've got research that shows that it's one of the most requested features all over the world, and the NAB did a study with Harris which said 81% of the public would want it. It has just not...
In Europe?
No, in the United States.
In the United States.
But it hasn't been known in this country. If you go into a cellular store today and you ask about radio, they'll talk about Pandora, they'll talk about streaming. but nobody talks about over-the-air broadcasting. It has been left out of the literature.
So let me turn to you, Mr. McCabe and Mr. Shapiro. What's your response to that? They're saying in Europe it's widely accepted and it's part of the culture. Why not in the United States?
Sure. I guess first I would start off by saying it is in 59 phones here in the United States. So that's pretty significant. If you can find 59 phones using a 20-minute search, that's number one. Number two, we have a manufacturer who manufactures phones globally, and they've done a similar survey, not in the context of our discussion here, and they gave consumers 33 choices. In the United States, the FM chipset came 31st out of 33rd. In the United Kingdom, it came 25th out of 33. In Brazil, it came in second. Now, it's just a different environment. The United States is a different environment. We have Pandora, we have Spotify, we have TuneIn. We have a range of options here that other entities don't.
Let me go back to Mr. Smulian then. He says there's already 59 devices that have that in the United States, and that it just won't work in our country. What is your response?
We are convinced that, yes, at 59, there are literally thousands of phones manufactured and sold in the United States. It has been sort of gradually put in since we've been having this discussion. Chips have finally been activated. But I think what you'll find is in the rest of the world, most of the chips manufactured in the world today are multifunction chips. So when they're shipped anywhere else in the world, because it's a standard part of the system, they're there. When they come into this country, they're still installed in the phones. They're just not turned on. And our question is, we'd like, especially as we get into an era of data caps, when people start paying not $30 a month for unlimited data, but maybe $40 or $50 or $60 or $70, right. You know, we all like the personalization of streaming. But when people understand the cost, we think the idea that having a free option is a big, big difference. So we're going into the era of data caps.
You're saying they're just not turned on.
They're not turned on.
Yeah. So would there be a problem with turning them on, Mr. McCabe or Mr. Shapiro? What's the problem with that?
Again, the 59 that we've identified are active FM chipsets that you can utilize. They're you know, and again, we continue to have a discussion with NAB where they say they're not seeking a mandate, and yet here we are in front of Congress talking about something that NAB suggests is a business issue. And if it's a business issue, why are they not advertising this? If Mr. Westergren wants his product to be known to people, he advertises it. I have yet to hear a single advertisement or a single mention by Mr. Smolian and his multitude of radio stations.
Let's come back to Mr. Smolian.
Okay.
If you could answer that.
The industry has started promoting the fact that you can get radios, but they have been so infrequent until the last 6 months. But I think the question is we don't understand, since obviously you use less battery life turning on a cell phone with a radio than you do streaming, why aren't they activated? They're activated all over the world. All you have to do is turn them on. That was the question that we would ask.
Well, Mr. Gutman-McCabe is saying they are turned on. Is that your assertion?
I mean, I can submit this for the record, Congressman. This is a Best Buy catalog that lists 26 of them out of the less than 80 that they identify. 26 by FM chipset. There's a little dot X in that category.
Come back to Mr. Smolian again, please.
It's interesting. The NAB did a study that when they went to the Verizon catalog, they had 18 specific features that you could buy on their phones. Never was radio mentioned. What we're finding is it has almost been deliberately kept from the consumer. Mm-hmm. Yes, there are 59 phones, and I'm thrilled that there are. 6 months ago, there were probably 20 phones. A year ago, there were none. But the reality is we sell thousands of different models of phones in this country, and I would submit that out of those thousands of phones, of the smartphones, a great majority of them have an FM chip that's not turned on.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Shapiro?
Yeah, if broadcast is such a powerful medium, they should be advertising it, and consumers may then want to go buy it, and Best Buy and others will carry more. I'd also suggest that comparing us to other countries, it is cultural, perhaps, but we are very different. We have a different digital television system. We have a unique geography and a unique culture. And we are the fountain of Internet creation here, so there's nothing wrong with that. And I want to paraphrase the acting chairman, Bono Mack, who I read a quote from this morning. But why not mandate them in cars, in lights, in pillows? Why all of a sudden smartphones? And it's just not a matter of activating a chip, I want to point out. You have to have an antenna that works for FM, which is not necessarily the same antenna that will work well for the cellular signal.
So you're saying that the phones in the United States, even if you activated them, would not be able to receive it because they don't have the proper antenna? Is that what?
Well, it's a quality of the reception as well. I mean, you could get a very weak, staticky signal without a great antenna, but if you might have to add a better
quick final word, Mr. Smolian, please.
The antennas that come with cell phones are the antenna in almost every case. There are also internal antennas. The phone I have here, and the fidelity is perfect. It's the size of a human hair. So they're available. They've dealt with this problem over 1 billion times everywhere else in the world.
Thank you all for being here. It's a very important discussion. Thank you all for being here.
All right. The gentleman yields back, and the chair now recognizes Mr. Lotto for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you all for being here with us today. It's been, as already stated by others, it's been a very, very interesting discussion. Mr. Gutman-McCabe, if I could start with a couple questions to you. I found it interesting in your testimony that you were saying that, of course, America is really at the forefront of innovation in this across the globe. And also with that innovation comes, job creation. Any idea what's being created out there in jobs in the industry today?
Yeah, we are responsible directly for several million jobs and indirectly for tens of millions of jobs. And that continues to evolve as you see our service go into areas, we call them verticals. So Mr. Shimkus, I think, talked about the credit card swipe. M-Health, I'm the beneficiary of mobile M-Health products myself, mobile education. And so it's almost impossible to quantify a volume of jobs because you see, services like Mr. Westergren's and others moving on to the mobile platform and things evolving on a daily basis. Right now, we have 6% of the world's wireless subscribers, but we have 70% of the world's LTE subscribers. So we are at the cutting edge. Mr. Shapiro talked about sort of we're the internet country. I think that's true. I think that's why you see a different approach to FM radio here than you do in other countries, because all of the companies that we've mentioned earlier began here in the United States. They're all driving employees, they're driving revenues, they're driving taxes and CapEx, and it's happening here. And all we say with regard to this FM chipset discussion is let there be choice, let the consumer choose, let innovation continue and flourish. And if consumers want more and more FM-enabled products, I assure you one of the 30 to 40 handset manufacturers will find ways of getting those products to the consumers.
Well, I also see in your next paragraph in your testimony you go on to talk about spectrum and the access to it. Are you going to have enough spectrum out there?
Well, we certainly, I think you may recall, CTIA, along with our friends at CEA, put a paper together which began the discussion about the incentive broadcast auction, because we looked at the needs that were coming up and then the spectrum that was in the pipeline, and it was an equation that caused us concern. So we started talking about a looming spectrum crisis. We are, as Mr. Shapiro suggested, extremely happy with what Congress did and what the President signed into law about bringing more spectrum to market. That is key. It has to happen in the next 3 to 5 years. There needs to be a move to get the spectrum, not just from the broadcasters, but from some of the federal government uses into the pipeline and out to the carriers, so that we can meet up with this, whether it's audio demand or video demand or the verticals with M-Health and education. So we will continue to sort of bang that drum to say, Congress did its part. Now we need the agencies to push this over the goal line, to finalize that part of it, to actually get the spectrum to market.
Well, you also say that you also need a light regulatory touch. Could you define light regulatory touch?
Sure. And I think the best way to describe it is, if we look back 3 years ago, or we'll go back 5 years ago. 5 years ago, the hottest selling phone was the Motorola Razr. It was a flip phone. There weren't app stores. There were less than 100 applications. And in that 5-year period, we have almost 60% of the phones are now smartphones. We have tablets. We have an environment that is changing so dramatically that to suggest, and this is the ranking member's opening statement, talked about trying to not lock in technology, because once you do that with a mandate, you're overtaken by events. In this world, it moves so quickly that by the time I have a phone that I call new, You know, my team members have 3 or 4 other phones that do things that I can't even, you know, contemplate. And so for us, it's first, do no harm. The physician's mantra. Look at a regulation, not just independent, but as a whole, look at it holistically and say, boy, adding this on top of the other regulations that are out there, how is it going to impact these Tier 2 or Tier 3 carriers, not just the large carriers, but all the others out there that are trying to upgrade their networks. And so for us, a light regulatory touch is, unless you see a significant failure in the market, you really shouldn't be contemplating regulation in such a fast-moving market segment as ours. We've taken to call it an ecosystem because companies like Pandora are now part of it, and our trade association is changing dramatically as we sit here. We have more companies now from the West Coast, from Silicon Valley. We have, you know, the Googles and the Microsofts, but we also have the smaller companies because this ecosystem is evolving. And so a light regulatory touch is first, do no harm. Have a sense of what you're regulating and make sure you don't have a negative impact on investment, on jobs, on innovation.
Thank you very much. And Madam Chair, I see my time has expired and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Lotta. The chair now recognizes Ms. Matsui for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Westergren, Pandora, I know, is a very popular app with my constituents. I think I have 150,000 active listeners in my district. And I'm buying a new refrigerator. I'm thinking about having it embedded, I suppose. But I had to spend a lot of time with my refrigerator then, I think. And I don't want to do that. But anyway, since everybody else has commented on the Clear Channel business model, what do you think about the online streaming business model of Clear Channel?
Well, I'm not privy, of course, to the details of that transaction. The one thing we think about it is it clearly is evidence that even for a company of Clear Channel size and sort of business competence, they are realizing that internet radio is a tough business. That's for a company that is, you know, probably one of the world's best at selling advertising. Mm-hmm. So I just feel like it's, you know, just one more signal that something's broken in the royalty rate setting for internet radio.
So do you think that's a big signal?
A huge signal.
Huge signal, right?
Absolutely. It's,
okay.
There could not be a bigger one.
How is the growth and availability of smartphones and tablets correspond to the growth in internet radio?
Yeah, smartphones is the ballgame for Pandora. I mean, our growth rate doubled overnight the day we launched on the iPhone. And it's not only led to a massive increase in smartphones, they've also driven adoption across consumer electronics and cars because people began taking smartphones and plugging them into their car dashboards and really using Pandora in the car. That led to now virtually every major car manufacturer partnering with us to embed it in the dashboard. So it's really, the mobile technology has completely transformed the whole internet radio industry.
Okay. Mr. Goodman McCabe, monthly data caps, potentially, could they have an effect potentially on innovation for new audio services available through mobile broadband connection? And can you provide some examples?
Sure. I would say that when we look at monthly data caps, the word you chose is actually a perfect word. It's innovation. So often when we think of innovation in our ecosystem, we talk about it in the context of devices or in networks or things like that. In our space, I have seen in my 11 years at CTI as much or more innovation in the service plan space as I've seen in the technology space. So if you think back 10 years ago, we paid for every minute coming and going. And then someone magically came up with buckets of minutes. And then we had nights and weekends, and we had prepaid, and we had rollover minutes, and my faves, and my circle. And then we had sort of the all-you-can-eat, and now we have different entities offering levels of caps. And the way that we look at it at CTI, because of our friends over at the Department of Justice, we tend to stay away from pricing issues. But we look at it as allow the market to continue to evolve and innovate. We saw Cricket Leap came up with a new service called Move, which is an audio-based service. and came up with a unique pricing structure for it, which was separate from their cap or their plan.
Does anyone else have a comment on that?
I think what people have to understand is, and you can see it with AT&T having, 21,000% data growth since the introduction of the iPhone. There is a staggering amount of data being consumed for entertainment. We're all big believers. We stream, everyone in the broadcast industry streams. We find it, and I guess the best way is to give you an example if I can for a minute.
Yeah.
I have a radio station in Los Angeles. We reach a little under 3 million people a week. My cost of electricity for that radio station is $39,000 a year. So for $39,000, I can reach one person in Southern California or 15 million. But I actually reach just under 3 million. If I took my transmitter down, my cost of reaching my just under 3 million people would be a little over $1 million a year. That's my cost to reach them. Their cost to receive the signal would be identical or probably actually higher because I'd buy in bulk. The question you have, and I think it's really the heart of all this, listen, innovation, the consumer will make the decision, whether I'm out of business or Tim's out of business or anyone. But the real issue here that we're not noticing is the American public willing to pay ever-increasing cost to receive its entertainment in a spectrum that is becoming increasingly crowded? You now can use your entire monthly data cap on your smartphone or your tablet in watching a baseball game or a movie in 3 hours. The fact is, if the American public wants to pay it, great. Our whole point is, look, we have a free alternative. Just turn the chip on. But the reality is the data consumption for the American public is growing at staggering rates. And the question that really needs to be asked is this the best way to entertain the American public or inform them?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay, I understand. Well, thank you very much.
And gentlelady's time has expired. The chair now recognizes Mr. Bilbray for 5 minutes.
Well, let's just follow up on and allow anybody to jump in on this thing. But the question again is, if we have the chips available, and what's the opposition to turning those on? Again,
I have no idea. I think I know, because if people are consuming free radio, they're not buying data. That's the opposition, bluntly. They're not buying data.
Okay. One thing that shocks me is that in a techie-savvy world, as we think it is, how few of consumers realize that that's something that is available in the United States or could be available. When you go over to third world countries, you go overseas, you see this as being, matter of course a lot more and more and more. Of course, sometimes I think that people that are not being distracted by old technology is getting a lot more hype on that. I was actually, Madam Chair, surfing on an island off of Panama, and a kid spoke perfect English, and when I asked him what school he went to learn it, he said, no, my iPhone taught me the English language. But that shows you what they've got. But how can we move this and allow the consumer to know this is an option to where they can make an informed decision?
One of the things that we appreciate from our friends at CTIA is finally in the last year, there are phones that are being activated. The chips are being turned on. I'm thrilled to see it's 59. A month ago it was about 20 or 25. Now again, there's hundreds, maybe thousands of phones. But the reality is that, up until recently, the NAB did a study. They sent people into phone stores, and when they went into phone stores, the salespeople had no idea. When you got the sales card, if you go into a phone store anywhere else in the world, it says top features, and FM is always listed. You found that card in the United States, it was never mentioned. We need to change that, and we think it's been an active idea to sort of not have the consumer be aware of it. And I'll also say something else. We as a broadcast industry must also say, you can now get phones in cell phone stores with radios in them. We haven't been able to say that until recently.
Congressman, if I could, I don't think you were here for this earlier, but I sent our intern, who used to work on Capitol Hill, out to Best Buy to secure their June catalog. They put out a wireless catalog each month, and here it is. It always has a pull-out section, and this pull-out section lists phones and features from carriers and from manufacturers. and it lists about 80 phones. It specifically identifies 26 that have the FM chipset available in it. And as I said, we've found 59. So again, Mr. Smolian says he wants to have a factual discussion, and the facts are that this capability is available, and if consumers desire it, they have access to it. In the third world countries, some of those wireless carriers don't have second generation, let alone fourth, or what we have is, or third, let alone fourth, what we have generation here. So our consumers are savvier. They see services like Pandora and Spotify and others, and they take advantage of those, and they get their music in their format when they want it. Yet, there are still 59 phones available. And when our manufacturers do an analysis of what sells in Germany versus Brazil versus the United States, that differs. And their phones...
I'm going to interrupt a second because the Madam Chair and myself, we have districts that have suffered massive wildfires. And one of the things that my consumers would like to know about is the fact that it could be life-saving if they had that capability during an emergency, when instead of using a reverse 911 call and all the stuff that we've been doing with hardwire and with cell phones, is the ability of somebody to be able to tune in and know exactly from the local station what's going on and be able to carry it with them, not have to be in their car, and still be able to have that information. There's a big one there from the safety factor that I think you're going to see disaster preparedness people raising that as being an option, much like the 9/11 chip, the 911 chip was.
Sure, and we recognize that. And again, I guess I would point to the fact that if consumers want that capability, it is in 59 phones. I've testified in the Homeland Security Committee on the WARN Act and emergency alerts. And several months ago, I was crossing the Roosevelt Bridge, and I got my alert through my wireless device. We had our radio on. We had our daughters in our car. It was tuned to our local channel. We got our emergency alert through Arlington Alerts through our wireless device. And so we don't look that wireless is replacing the emergency alert capabilities of radio. We look at it as supplemental. And to us, having both of those capabilities is fantastic, just like having television broadcasts and others and delivering them.
I understand that, but Madam Chair, my time's up. I think that the fact is people are starting to depend on this for more and more, and they want to consolidate it. They don't want to be carrying 4 or 5 or whatever, and it's becoming all-inclusive. We just want to make sure the consumer has that choice, and I yield back.
I think the gentleman the chair now recognizes Ms. Christensen for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Smolian, you seemed as though you wanted to answer that last question.
Yes. I think I would ask the question in his district or your district or any district, when there's an emergency, are people actually going to be alerted and get the information they need in a 90-character text? We would say it. Oh, we've been doing this. We have been alerting and informing the American public for almost 90 years. And I believe that especially in a world in which the Internet clogs up, the cell system is jammed, or in the worst emergencies, it is gone completely. When we have emergency generators, backup generators, we still remain the only people who can inform the American public at the time they need it the most.
Well, let me thank. I just saw that you were chomping at the bit to respond, and my colleague's time had been up. But let me also ask you a question about something that took place in my general neighborhood. The Puerto Rico legislature recently held a hearing on legislation that would require FM chips in cell phones in order to deliver those emergency alerts, and the bill was endorsed by the Puerto Rican Broadcasters Association. Did NAB support this legislation? And as a follow-up, I'd like to ask you, and also Mr. Gutman-McCabe, do you believe that states and territories should have the right to establish their own emergency alerting systems and mechanisms?
Well, I want to defer to the NAB because I'm not sure what the position was. But obviously, I can tell you, I believe that every portable device should have this chip. It's included in most, and it can come on in any emergency. And I'll defer to the NAB on what the position in Puerto Rico was. I guess they didn't take a position.
You didn't take a position.
I understand NAB did not take a position.
Okay. A lot of the questions that I had were already asked, but It's interesting, you know, we've had this discussion about chips that are not activated. Do we
Okay, sorry. We were right about to change the chair here, so give us 1 minute to see what the technical problem is. And it seems like the perfect point for me to leave and hand it over to you, Steve. Yes. I think it was your seersucker that did it.
Am I?
It's on now? Okay.
Should I respond?
Go ahead.
We don't know exactly. We think that most smartphones shipped to this country have a multifunction chip, which includes FM radio. For example, in every iPhone, there has been an FM chip that has not been turned on. We don't know the exact number, but we think the great majority, and the only way to do it is to tear a phone apart. But we understand, based on sales figures, that almost all smartphones that are shipped to this country, and this is obviously millions, have an FM chip that just hasn't been turned on.
Okay, Mrs. Shapiro, did you want to answer that? And I remember having a phone maybe about 10 years ago, and I like to walk and listen to music, and I used to listen to the radio on my phone. I can't do it anymore. Did something change?
You can buy phones that do that. There's several dozen available in the marketplace. As Ms. Eshu pointed out, consumers don't really demand that feature. I think the radio broadcasting industry can change that dynamic by aggressively advertising for it, and then consumers will do it. The other way they could change the dynamic is although we've heard a witness testify it cost almost nothing, well, if it costs almost nothing, they should be willing to pay for that feature, as other feature providers often do, to have that in telephones. What this is really about is not about emergencies at all. This is about an industry trying to preserve its market share. 47% of Americans listen to less radio today than they did just 1 year ago. So it's gone down dramatically, and they're coming to Congress, and they say they're not requesting a mandate, but yet in word and action, they're acting very differently. So all this talk about emergencies, and I specified in my written testimony why the emergency feature is somewhat greatly overrated, because you can for various reasons, but this is just about a rather old industry trying to deal with the fact that there's new players out there, and despite the fact they don't even play fairly, they don't pay.
Let me try to get my last question to Mr. Smillian. Since they're already available, why should individuals be forced to get these FM chips in their mobile devices if they didn't want them?
Well, number one, I want to respond to Mr. Mr. Shapiro, excuse me, forgive me. I really apologize. Number one, the statement there's 41% less listening is crazy. There are more people listening to radio stations in the United States today than ever have been. We have 241 million of the 12-plus population and about 275 million of the 6-plus population. The fact is more Americans listen to radio today than ever in the history of this country. Our whole point is we think, based on experiences around the world and based on the study that has been done, that the great majority of people would use the radio if it were activated. We think that it's an opportunity, especially at a time when data caps are coming and people are going to be forced to understand how much more they're paying for audio that they haven't had to pay before data caps came.
Okay, my time is well up, so thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentlelady. Yields her time, and I will recognize myself for 5 minutes to ask questions. Start with Mr. Westergren. I've used Pandora many times. It's an honor to meet the founder of Pandora. Want to first ask on the royalty arrangement that you have. 50% of revenue is what Pandora pays. Is it based when you're dealing with the Copyright Royalty Board? Is it based on revenue? Is it based on number of plays? How did they come to the amount that you have to pay versus what XM and what other platforms have to pay?
Sure. It's actually written as a greater of a per song fee or 25% of revenue. So that's how it's calculated. And currently that per song fee is the larger number, and it equals about 50%.
And so was there a back and forth, or did they just impose this upon you, and you've got your business model, and now you've got to pay 50% of whatever revenue you have, knowing that your competitors are paying a much lower rate? How did that come about? And is there any kind of appeals process?
So it was imposed upon us by an arbitration, the Copyright Royalty Board, which is a 3-judge panel as part of the Copyright Office that actually per law, federal law, every 5 years determines what our rate will be for the ensuing 5 years. And they came up with a ruling last time that led to our current rates. And really the argument we're here to make is we're okay with a centralized license. We actually really embrace that. It really enables our business. But we want the rate setting that we have to come from the same guidelines that other forms of radio derive their rates, which currently is not true. So that 3-judge panel, when they consider our rates, are guided by a different and worse or more disadvantageous set of criteria than, say, XM Sirius or, of course, broadcast.
Okay, and then on the deal that was just reached between Clear Channel and Big Machine, that to me seems like an example of the system working where private parties go and negotiate rates, and once they come to an agreement, that's what they pay, and now they've got the ability to move forward and do business. Is that a better model, do you think, than having a government agency with their arbitration panel imposing rates upon you where you don't really get that opportunity to go and negotiate with the actual artist that you're helping to promote?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think where we come to that topic on is part of Pandora's mission as a company is about giving wide exposure to a huge catalog of artists, both from the standpoint of artists as well as listeners. So playing old big band music for somebody who's older and playing the latest hip-hop for our kids.
Or New Orleans jazz, as you mentioned in your opening statement, which
exactly.
I'm very fond of.
You name it, we're playing it. That requires our ability to easily license and access a huge catalog of music, much of what is being created by artists who are not on labels, some of whom are literally hobbyists that do it on the weekends at home, making great music. And absent a compulsory license, in other words, one place we can go to get permission to do all that, it would be impossible for us to go find all those people and get the proper permission to do it. That catalog, which is about 1 million songs right now, would be dramatically smaller. So the great benefit of a compulsory license is inclusion for artists and breadth of listening for music for listeners.
I'll have to get the name of the band that you were in when you were playing, because I can't
Never
find
given
it.
that up.
I can't find it on Pandora when I search it. Mr. Newberry, you had something you wanted to add.
Yes, sir. I'd like to make a couple of observations. First of all, I think while we disagree on some points, Mr. Westergren and I would both agree that the Copyright Royalty Board set a rate structure that has suffocated the expansion of the industry and makes it very difficult. I don't know if I would have gone into his business model, but that's a decision he made, and I'll respect that. He's perfectly capable of making that. But where we disagree is that radio...
And if you can wrap it up, because my time's running out.
Very quickly. Radio is not just music. Radio stations, what we represent as the National Association of Broadcasters, have local information, compelling personalities, emergency services, and when Mr. Shapiro says that this is just an effort for us as an outdated technology and questions our commitment to emergency information in our services, I take disagreement with that. We have a long heritage of providing that information. We're very sincere about that intent.
Could I just...
Well, let me, and my time's about to run out. I've got a question I wanted to ask for Mr. Smolin. On the NAB website, you actually call on Congress. It's a section that says action needed, and you're calling on Congress to consider ways to expand availability of these FM chips. And,
Right.
and again, I mean, in a free market, if somebody wants one, I think Mr. McCobb showed some examples of where people can go purchase it. I know on laptops and other tablet devices, if you want a wireless card, in some cases you have to pay extra for that, even though it's something that people use every single day. And I know I'm happy to pay extra for it, but I have the option as a consumer not to pay extra for it or to buy it later. Are y'all asking for Congress to do something that they, right now, I mean, you're saying that Congress needs to take action. I just want to ask you to expand.
Well, number one, we did a study that said 81% of the American public would pay more to have an activated radio.
But what are you calling on Congress to do?
Okay.
Because you're calling on Congress on your website.
We would like a study that was requested. We would like this issue to be fully vetted. We believe that the most important thing is it's not a question of paying more. Turn on the chips that people have already paid for. When I bought this
So you're
phone,
calling on Congress to take action regarding mandates on
we are
one
not.
way or another.
We're asking for a full and complete discussion. But my only point is, I don't want to call it a mandate, but I paid for an FM radio in this phone. It's turned off. If I buy this phone in London, England, it's got an FM radio. I pay the same price in the United States for the same phone. They turned the radio off. So we're saying, wait a minute. And we'd like that issue studied and discussed more fully.
All right, my time has expired. I see that we have one of our colleagues from the full committee, not on the subcommittee, but is interested in asking questions. So I'd ask unanimous consent to allow Mr. Green from Texas to be allotted 5 minutes to ask questions. Without objection, the gentleman from Texas is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Eshoo, and the membership of the committee for allowing me to weigh in on our committee today. At any given time, I've been on Energy and Commerce since '97, so I've been on Telecom Subcommittee and off of it, depending on where our seniority's at. I want to thank our witnesses for appearing today. I've been an advocate of free over-the-air radio for many years, and the future of audio is an important topic for my constituents in the Houston and Texas area. All of us along the Gulf Coast, and I know my colleague that's sitting in the chair now realizes that we rely on radio for alerts, hurricanes, floods, and other emergencies. There's a proposal that the government set fees for radio stations to pay to record labels, and it's deeply flawed. And again, as the chairman mentioned, the announcement from Clear Channel and Big Machine Label Group indicates that the private marketplace is well suited for those negotiations and show the government does not have to have a role here. Mr. Allison, I'd like to ask you a question. And again, we don't have a whole lot of time, but and keep your answers as brief as possible. In your testimony, you say that broadcasters are getting a free ride by playing music without having to pay. What would the music industry do without radio now that actually provides free coverage of a lot of music, no matter what venue?
Well, I'm certainly not advocating getting rid of radio. I love radio. I'm fortunate to have had 6 #1 albums, albeit on non-commercial independent radio. But yeah, I think the big problem for me is whereas there are these royalty streams for internet radio, satellite, cable, for performers, there is none for terrestrial radio.
Well, the performers, I mean, the internet radio, oftentimes you pay a subscription fee.
Yeah, but I mean, there's no.
But the difference is, if I turn on my radio in my car, and believe me, I'm one of that huge group that every time I'm in my vehicle, I listen to the radio. In my area, it's country music or news, and thank goodness we do have FM news station now in Houston. But artists bound to benefit from that exposure on radio.
Sure, well, Pandora's free as well. I mean,
well, I know you, but the consumer pays for a subscription to Pandora. Is that not correct?
No,
that's not correct. Well, Pandora must make money somehow from it. From
probably advertising, I guess.
But I guess my concern is that Pandora is not required to do, for example, emergency announcements. I don't know if they do or not. Maybe Mr. Cleese can tell me, but you know, our free over-the-air radio is been there for decades and provides that. No matter what venue you have, they all have some type of public interest, whether it's news at the top or the bottom of the hour, but they also have access to emergency alerts like 911 for a number of other issues that maybe Pandora or other newer generations cannot do. And do you believe that artists who are not currently getting a lot of airtime would benefit from a fee regimen, if there was a certain fee agreement that was reached by a government agency or something else?
You mean start charging for terrestrial radio? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I don't understand the question. I'm sorry.
Okay. Well, I guess what the question is: do you believe that artists who do not currently get a lot of airtime would benefit from the fee-based regimen?
From a performance rate.
From a fee-based regimen that royalties, that radio would pay for royalties for paying, similar to other venues. Do you think the artists who are not receiving free over-the-air radio now, or are not currently getting a lot of airtime, would benefit from a fee-based regimen, no matter who imposes it?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. I know.
Can I just jump in here? Sure.
Many
Many artists will get payments background musicians, not just featured musicians, will be paid if there's a performance royalty for terrestrial over-the-air radio. I'd also like to just comment on the public interest obligation. There's no subsidy given for rent or for electrical use or transmissions or anything else for radio. Songwriters are still paid, even though, and they should be, even though there's a public interest obligation by radio stations. They get their spectrum for free. That doesn't mean
I only have 30 seconds left. Let me finish, though. That's the difference. We have a lot of new generation technology that is great. But at the same time, I don't want to eliminate what maybe, whether it's in the rural area of Louisiana or a very urban area of Houston, that people will turn on that radio and limit that availability because of a cost that may be imposed by a regimen, whether it be Congress but unless it's agreed to, like what happened with the Clear Channel.
And I can assure you that we have, in all the legislation thus far, has made huge accommodations to make sure that small radio stations in rural Louisiana are not impacted in any way.
Well, I've been in those negotiations typically with our jurisprudence or judiciary committee, and so far they haven't reached that commonality that we could get an agreement. But that's the concern. I'm mainly here because I'm concerned about the loss of that information available to my constituents that are not provided by a lot of other new venues. And, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the time.
Gentleman yields back. And with that, I would like to remind members that they have 10 business days to submit any questions to our panelists and would ask that the panelists respond to those questions. I want to thank all of y'all for participating in our hearing today. And with that, this subcommittee stands adjourned.